Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to Big Little Small Talk. My guest today is Wayne Fossey. Wayne is an elder in residence in the office of the Vice-Chancellor at UniSQ, and Wayne and I caught up the other night for a really exciting announcement where there's a $50 million grant awarded to UniSQ for space research. Wayne, welcome along to Big Little Small Talk. Before we get into who you are and what you are, can you tell me about the grant out there at UniSQ?
Yeah, Jingari, Megan. I'd just like to start by acknowledging country, the power of the country which we all walk on and we live on. We are sort of part of this country, and lots of people have walked before us, those elders and those people who are emerging, and part of the leadership. And you're part of that leadership in terms of our council at this present time. Yeah, the Trailblazer program has been focused upon the nature of space. So it sounds rather strange that a regional space, a regional university, creates the leadership for 3 universities around Australia and world-class research into the development of what is propulsion, what is the materials that hold it all together in order to form the rocketry, enabled to launch satellites, and basically the explosion element, the exciting boys' toy element that I say is part of that. And it's led by a local researcher, Peter Schubel, amazing man, and absolutely amazing team of young people, but also this particular project involves some input from the federal government, a huge input from universities, including UniSQ, and also the fact that private providers are now involved as well. So everybody has managed to look and trust in the nature of future equipment and development around space research.
So it's going to mean that UniSQ is the leading university in Australia in terms of space research, I'm led to understand.
Without a doubt, and our Vice-Chancellor Geraldine McKenzie is also on the national board and has been so for some time. So it's great to see leadership from a regional university. It's great to see leadership from Toowoomba, and it means that it will develop a future precinct, either on the top of the range or below the range at Helidon, for example, in terms of ways in which we can get that. That will employ at least another 50 people, senior researchers from all around Australia. That will just mean that generations of researchers will continue in the space game. It's the key area about space is often getting the objects from ground to space, and so this is the area that has been probably neglected most of all, and there've been lots of problems and mistakes and huge dangers attached to it. So the specialisation of UniSQ is really into that area, and so we have talked with many people over a long period of time about the nature of space, and within an Aboriginal perspective it has a definite sort of understanding where space comes from and how it fits. And we also know that space is important for part of our local tourism industry with the Dark Skies process, which we are involved with for many years as well. So it's important to, not only, as my grandfather used to say, look up because your feet will find the way, and learn about what's above, and it's mirrored in our life from what's above. It may be the reverse mirroring, but it's certainly the same sort of thing. So there's a lot of work around the nature of astronomy. There's a lot of work around cultural astronomy that probably needs to be better understood by most Australians.
Now, you started off with Jingari, and I did have that written down to say to you. That's obviously a welcome or a hello.
Yeah, it's a hello. Yeah, it's a hello word.
In which language or which?
Yeah, my connected language is through my mum's side, and that's Yugambeh. Yugambeh is on the Gold Coast, so it's basically from Logan City over the Tweed border into New South Wales, keeping in mind that the 1859 border is a construct on a piece of paper. So, Australians as such would look at something like the border as being very significant, and COVID has recreated our border understanding. However, it really doesn't exist. It's go and look for the fence, go and look for the line, and you won't find it. And it includes an artificiality that we really take for granted, rather than saying that this was all Australia, and this connection didn't exist in Queensland's terms until 1859.
Right. So I want to talk about your heritage and your journey to being an elder in residence in the office of the Vice-Chancellor. What does an elder in residence do?
Look, I think I have probably the best role in the world. It's one of those opportunities to look across the entire university and across the 3 campuses at Springfield, Ipswich and Toowoomba. It's a role which looks at ways in which we can holistically understand the nature of Indigenous issues, but it's not all about issues. It's not all about negativity. It's really a chance to sit with Aboriginal people in our communities, which I've done on many, many occasions, what I call the 10 cups of tea, and be able to sit and listen and be able to translate that into futures for our students. Universities are about education, and they're also about business in today's world. They really are huge businesses. The University of Southern Queensland is the largest business, for example, in Toowoomba, employs more people and creates more dollars. And it used to be the Toowoomba Regional Council, but it's not anymore. It far exceeds that sort of situation. And I think the other relevant part for my job is really the nature of connecting not just communities, but connecting knowledges of the past, knowledges of how we can go on to the future. So, I'm involved in other things besides USQ. My role is a part-time role, but it seems to be like a 7-day-a-week part-time role. Yeah.
So how is the participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the tertiary sector, not just at USQ?
Look, it's a growth area. It's a slow growth. It's a sequential growth over time. I come from a background where nobody had an education as such, and difficulties in family in terms of learning to read and write. And I was the first person within my family structure to go to grade 8, and my dad encouraged me then to go to grade 10, and then to grade 12, and then to go to university. Now, there were no scholarships for Aboriginal people. In my time, the scholarship was a military scholarship because you managed, if you're probably lucky or unlucky, to get what I call a free haircut when you're 20 as part of conscription. So it's a different sort of process. I think the number of students are growing. I think the awareness of our students across the generational barriers are growing. And last night I met, for example, people that were first generation again in family in their 30s, and so pleased to meet the mums and the 35-year-old who was able to say, I'm an Aboriginal woman, I'm a person that's studying, I'm now studied, inverted commas, I'll continue to study, and I'm now working for the university as well for the last 3 months. So, we see that generational change, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Year on year, you see the increase in the numbers,
yep.
And there is support there for Indigenous kids to go to university, bridging courses and the like, isn't there?
There certainly is, yeah.
I know you have had a really interesting journey from... Tell me about being raised in a tin shed with a dirt floor.
Yeah, look, my dad came back from World War II and found my mum in Nambour, the magic Namba, and then there was a shortage of timber, a shortage of wool, there was a shortage of accommodation, which I think many people today can really understand the same context. So as a result of that, a gentleman who had lost his son as a pilot during World War II said, right, we would like to create 3 places for men who've come back from the war. I've lost my son, but I would really like to create 3 things out the back. So what they did was groups of men gathered together. They put down ant bed, which was used for tennis courts, as the floor of tennis courts in my time, and they created the tin shed, the tank, the shared house cow across the 3 individuals, and men were given the chance to come there. So it's an open shed. So that was the beginnings of my time on the banks of Petrie Creek in Nambour, and we then moved into a house, and eventually my dad built his own house as part of a war service loan after being in the war. So I think it's exceptionally important that when you look at people today, and we take lots of things for granted, and on a cold morning in Toowoomba, I really wonder how people lived out in the open or in tents or in houses or in sheds, and we still have today the same thing happening. So it's really quite significant, I think, to realise the journeys of our predecessors, whether they be Aboriginal or not, how they've lived their lives.
So tell me about your Aboriginal heritage. Where did the lines there?
Yeah, it's been one of those things that we've followed, and I've followed over time, and some individuals within families are more passionate about it than others. And in what many times is called the light-skinned blackfella, the person who many people look at, for example, for colour. At school, we were those kids who were relatively poor. We didn't own shoes for many years, as an example. So we would go to school. We would be part of a group of people who would be Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, or what in those days was called Kanaka or South Sea Islanders. So over the back fence, that's what we shared when we moved into the town as proper. And so in many of our towns, we have areas that may be redefined by where the lower socioeconomic classes of individuals, to use that sort of derogatory term, still live. And so ours was called Frogs Hollow, and Frogs Hollow was because we had the frogs and we had the swamp and we had that sort of stuff, and it was a chance to be able to get people from lots of different backgrounds into that area. So you really were brought up amongst Aboriginal people, you were brought up amongst TIs, you were brought up amongst the nature of South Seas, and they were our friends at schools. My dad's connection through his extended line is through Raglan Station, which is near Gladstone. Raglan Station was a massive station and very strong white history in terms of Lord Lansborough and other people. And Mum's connection is through the Gold Coast, through the Yugambeh side, through Beaudesert. And Beaudesert, the station was the first station, so that we were part of that sort of line that were brought into that country from New South Wales, from Kempsey. So it's really interesting to look at how your own family follows those journeys over time. The Toowoomba Library, where we are today, does a great job in terms of helping people with their family histories. And it's a job where it creates a massive amount of tourism for this city, where people come here. I've sat with many families. What I do find is that it's obviously that the Aboriginal histories are far harder to find and far harder to track in many, many ways. And it's not a matter of just simply finding a birth certificate or trying to work through it. Often birth certificates don't exist, or they're totally incorrect. And children, as we would say in the past, have been born under the blanket. And it's been a situation where many families get an intersect by oral history. So it creates inevitable challenges when you look at where you do come from, which sounds a simple question, but it really is quite complex.
Yes, where are you from? That's right. Well, yesterday we went on a wonderful tour, and I think you called it See the Black Side of Toowoomba.
Yeah. I think that upsets some people sometimes. So it can be called the other side of Toowoomba or the black side of Toowoomba, or the dark side. Yeah.
The dark side. We started talking about Tiddick, the frog. Can you explain what Tiddick the frog is?
Yeah,
and
so
the significance for Toowoomba.
I think the importance that people in today's world misunderstand is often the nature of oral culture. So when nothing is written for you on a sheet of paper, artworks are maintained, but we didn't have any dot paintings here, for example. What we did have, and I've seen it for my own eyes, is if you come above Redwood Park, you'll find a cave with paintings in those caves. You go to Maidenwell and you'll find caves with paintings inside those caves. Now, we don't publicly push that because we want to maintain our resources. So you're existing in an oral culture. Stories are really important, ancient stories that people would see, but they're dreaming stories, and they're learnt by repeating them. So that's how you get your song lines, words, so people go along repeating the stories and the songs. So the long journey that leads to Tiddick, and what people remember is what has been the story which creates an awareness. And that awareness could be about love, it could be about relationships, it could be about pain, it could be about death, it could be about the most important things that affect us are usually extreme heat, fires and burning and whatever, or extreme cold, or really the most important thing is thirst. So Aboriginal camps were established around water bases, and it's very important to realise that Toowoomba has a swamp, for example, which we consider to be a negative thing. Swamps, mosquitoes, midges, etc., unpleasant, is perceived as being a magic food source because everything happens at the swamp. People drink it, animals drink at the swamp, people come to the swamp to be part of that, and the plants are important. So within that context, Tiddick is the frog. It originated, to our knowledge and to my knowledge, with different names, but Tiddick is a more southern name, and it is the frog on country at the Pittsworth area, which sucks up all the water, that dries the landscape. And in that drying of the landscape, it takes away life for all other animals. And we're talking about a period of time where humans are about to come from above to the earth. And as a result of that, the animals figure out that they've got to make the frog laugh, this gigantic frog. And the kookaburra tries its usual laugh, and another animal tries its laugh. And we can go on to 20 animals, but we're going to distinguish the first and the last. Finally, the animal that does make Tiddick laugh are the eels. And if you've seen how eels move across landscape, the wiggle and the turn, and you can imagine that that can be both vertical and horizontal to be able to do so. So Tiddick laughs, Tiddick floods the landscape. It comes pouring in one direction towards the Condamine. It comes pouring back towards Toowoomba, and it runs down our creeks, and it comes gushing all the way through as it does through the mountain passes. And as it runs down, it floods Helidon, it floods Grantham, and we've been there more times than we would hope to imagine in more recent histories. It then floods Ipswich, and then it floods Brisbane. So the Tiddick story is the Tiddick story which says, okay, water is important, flooding has happened before, drought has happened before, so we need to be aware of all those things. Therefore, value water.
Right. Yes. No room for climate change within that within that songline.
Climate change is happening, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Just explain the significance of songlines, because yesterday you said, I always thought that songlines was a pathway in a way. Something sort of like a place where people journeyed along, but songlines aren't that, are they?
Well, songlines are many things that all join together. So if you think about an oral culture, and people like me, for example, were taught to, you're taught to count, you're taught to do various things, you're taught various names, and you're taught not in a classroom, you're taught separation, male and female. That's how we do it now. And we've done it, it's always been done in the past like that. But you walk on country to do so. So your pathways are the pathways that you do walk on country, and they're exceptionally important, and they're led by major features. So in the Toowoomba region, you have Mount Tyson, for example, Mount Kynoch as an example. These jump-ups are the traditional markers, and if you have a look across a number, and I've just been to Smoky Mountain, for example, outside Pittsworth, you'll find there's the traditional signal site on that. So we know that people talked in the past beyond talking as such, beyond using smoke, using other markers, using tree markers, using all sorts of things to show you direction, to show spaces. And of course we know the stars are an integral part of that. So the songlines are the journeys that link the earth to the sky. So the sky itself in various versions. And it's interesting to me that the Southern Cross played absolutely very, very little relevance in terms of what is really now the most important thing on our flags, on our whatevers. The Southern Cross is very much a European thing that, first of all, there had to be a cross. And that sort of idea originated in the difference between when people left the Northern Hemisphere and, all of a sudden, whether you're in a prison hulk or whether you're in a ship and you're whatever, but you're leaving your past behind to go to this strange country, to spend months on board a boat to come back to here. So one of the things you took with you was usually your Christian values and your Christian cross, but that's the cross of Constantine from the Roman Emperor time. And it's quite different to see that all these translations came. So the Eureka flag put the Southern Cross. But to Aboriginal people, we would shrug. We'd shrug our way through that. So the important thing, and you've seen it, is not just looking at stars and how it affects us. It's actually looking at the space between the stars, the blackness. So the story of the great emu, or Dinawan, the story of the male emu sitting on the eggs and the seasonal change. All of that sort of stuff has developed in the nature of understanding your sky movement, because that affects what you eat, the seasonal structures and seasonal change. You also know when to catch emus if you want eggs versus emus. And then if those of you who have tried to catch them, they're not easy to catch. They really aren't. So it's a complicated story of songline where also it's a process of learning. So in our area, it's a magnificent area and a key site, one of the 7 key sites in Australia where people came to the Bunya Mountains. So the songlines to the Bunya Mountains come through the Carnarvons, they come through the Condamine River. They change course at Dalby up Mile Creek, that mile which means blackfella, and it's generally a fairly derogatory term. And then they would head out to Jimbour Station, for example. So Mr. Bell and others that you've heard of that have been, and Russell, for example, they've been key people who've had thousands upon tens of thousands upon tens of thousands of individuals on their property. And there's recorded history, for example, on Bell's property at Jimbour, of having 15,500 people on that property over a period of that 4-month period. So it's astonishing to realise this is a key area in the world. It's a key area within Australia. And those songlines to the Bunyas, whether you're coming from the coast or whether you're coming from the south or the north. And recorded history also suggests that it's by invitation, so it's not a matter of going to a festival at Nimbin or something like that. It's a matter of being invited on country, and message sticks and people walk to deliver those invitations via a message stick, which is a marking on a piece of timber, really. And then a conversation was held for people from Rockhampton, that far north, and also people from Thargomindah and Cunnamulla out to the west, and recorded history going down to Aora people in Sydney and Port Macquarie as the major groups that came through. So significance of Bunyas is songline and more songline, but it's also significant for barter, marriage, a chance to have a good time, at times to settle the parliaments of time. It's all these things that are interacting. So things are really not precisely defined as we do in English. They really have general meanings that are intersecting across a whole range of things.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40dB 102.7 FM, and we're in our segment called Big Little Small Talk, where we get to have lots of big talk, not with small people, but with big people, and hear their big stories. And my guest today on Big Little Small Talk is Wayne Fossey, who is the Elder in Residence, amongst other things, out at USQ. So we're just talking about the significance of the Bunyas. So how often is it thought that a meeting would take place there?
Sure. It's a significant thing to realise that meetings were held every year. So the year is not defined by 365 days as we look at our calendar. It's defined as a year based on the movement of the moon and the sun, especially the movement of the moon, so the number of moons. But more importantly, it's defined by the nature of plant. So Bunyas will flower and seed, and they will seed and be available in seed from February onwards, usually for a period of 4 or 5 weeks. So every 3 years, a gigantic crop of Bunyas happens. So the germination period is exceeded, and it's affected by wind and drought and all the other things that affect it. But every 3 years, so you would find huge movements of people. The intriguing thing is that the large numbers, and we're talking tens of thousands sometimes, could not fit onto the mountain. So they staged their camps as such, as a military staging would happen, at the base of those. And so there was a walkway for the Waka Waka, there was a walkway for the Kabi Kabi coming from the coast. The people from Stradbroke Island came to those areas. We had people from the south who had to negotiate getting their way through the main range, and if you were smart, you never really went out to sea in a bark canoe. What you did do is to find your way through the mountains, or you took the pathways which connected the south, which is the Warwick, Pittsworth, Stanthorpe pathways to us. And it's intriguing to me that when you think about some things that happen, for example, barter, which is really important. We found a particular rock called Wongawallan jasper, which is a jasper gemstone, which is used as a sharpening tool and as a point tool. It's only found on one ridge in Queensland, and that's one ridge of Mount Tamborine. So it's a traded good that's also travelled right out west. When you talk to the National Parks people at Girraween, for example, you'll find a very unusual shaped tomahawk head. It's Papua New Guinean. Right now, it's been found there many, many years ago. So it's obviously that people traded across the straits for many years, and it's ended up being discarded or lost or taken and dropped off at Girraween. So you'll find there's an intersection of cultures that have come to areas like the Bunyas for festivals. Arguments were settled. Dances were carried on, dances were shared, so that's how you shared knowledge about language and other people. And it's interesting that at the site at Highfields, which is what we call Gamunjuru or Gamunjuru, one of the symbols, one of the 7 totem symbols, is a sea turtle sitting on top of the Toowoomba Range. And it's a major sea turtle, like it's a big part of the rock arrangement, and it has eggs and what looks like droppings, but it's basically the eggs of the sea turtle. So that signifies the link between us and the saltwater people away from here, but it also especially signifies the link between this and Stradbroke Island, because Stradbroke Island, until the 1890s was one island, not North and South Stradbroke. Same thing that's happening to Bribie at the moment, being split. So you get these journeys, and those journeys are interconnected, and we have the 7 totems out here that represent 6 of what you would see as the major land animals, like kangaroos, etc.
Talk some more about kangaroo, because I mean it is an amazing thing that we have in our region that's quietly sitting there, and that's what I guess you're wanting. But talk some more about that.
I think Gamunjuru is one of those absolutely fascinating stories. It's the largest rock arrangement in Queensland. It's a forgotten gem, except by many of us, about what happened. I got involved in the 1980s, and I met the people who were 1970s actually. Met the people. I'm getting old. They met the people who were the people in those days. So it came from the story, and the person who's affected by this is still alive and living on the next door property to Gamunjuru at this moment, and she's in her 80s. So as a young woman, her dad used to be away working, and she walked down to an area, and she used to sit amongst what she called the fairy dell. And the fairy dell, eventually, she started to see people and talk to people in that area. There was no people there. That was their farm. And it was a pretty rough farm. And what then happened was the components of all those stories were told to her dad. And she took her dad down, and all of a sudden they discovered the nature of the rock arrangements. Those rock arrangements were placed there by people. About 5,400 years of age is the current digs, but it goes beyond that time, because you hit the glacial period, and there's a bit of a glacial mess that occurs with both climate in our local area. There's a link between the celestial points of Gamunjuru and a lot of these Bora sites. It's a male Bora site, so it was male initiation only. It was part of the Bunya journey as well. So if you were walking from Cunnamulla, it might take you 8 weeks to 9 weeks at least to get from there to the Bunyas. As a result, people were born and people died on the way. So birthing trees were significant. Arrangements to show direction by scar trees, for example, were there. In the meantime, you had to eat, and it depended where you could find water. So all of this is a part of that journey. Young men were taken onto country. A number of things happened over a period of weeks, and the final part of their ceremony was conducted at Gamunjuru. So people would stand on a bowl-type structure, which is where it exists, and the bull roarers would keep the women and the children away, because the punishment was very severe if you interfered with the nature of that initiation. And then they'd be walked through both a Bora ring and the process of circumcision and other things that occurred within that program. But you also learnt the significance, and this is the oral culture again standing up, where you were told of the major 7 symbols. And when you think about it, those 7 symbols represent animals in our cases, but totems can be plants, they can be clouds, they can be all sorts of things depending where you are. But if you think about it here, the most amazing thing that people have forgotten, it's so simple, is really to think about the emu, because the emu is a very significant animal. Now, as I said, hard to catch, but really, Toowoomba has so many examples. I think we have 5 associated emu creeks. We have Emu Vale. We have townships named around emus. And it's very significant to realise that they're a plains animal that existed, but they're also an extremely common animal on the coast. So when Oxley and Logan both found nets that they thought would catch kangaroos, and the one that Logan found was 70 feet. So divide that by 3 to give you an idea of the dimension. And he actually stole it, which was a definite no-no. You can imagine how long it would take to catch a net, to make a net. But they were made not to catch kangaroos. The kangaroos are relatively easier to catch. But they were made to catch emus because you'd get a group of people to burn country and make a hell of a noise, and that would chase the emus, and you'd chase them and net them at the same time. And then you'd let the females go and the young ones go, and keep the males and let maybe one or two males go. So it's a principle based on non-greed. It really is a principle based on scarcity, and you do
take what you need
exactly
when you need it.
Yeah.
So just going back to Gumanduru.
Yeah, sorry.
So there's these rock formations in this of the totems. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So there's the 7 major totems into the ground. We had. When I first got involved as a young fella, I was involved with the guy Bartholomew from Queensland Museum, and he was told by a number of people, including the Jerome family, look, this is really significant. Eventually, the person who owned it, who owned the land, inverted commas, in terms of title, he gave that land to us as such, and we're still going through the nature of that title. But what's happened, of course, is Toowoomba real estate is now extremely popular and has been for some time, especially Highfields. So what we need to realise is that it's not just Gumanduru, but there's a women's site nearby, which is on private land. There's a birthing site nearby, which is on private land. There's a communal ring, which is on the top of the hill at Highfields, now encroached on by real estate. So all of those, what we would call the general features of the nature of a past time before white civilisation as such has come onto this landscape, has been completely changed, and they've been taken over. In many cases, features were bulldozed when native title and other events were put through. People were very fearful as landowners that somebody was going to take their land, and that has not occurred at all. It's a misinterpretation of the nature of what is part of the legislation. So these sites are significant, but this is one of the few sites that has been saved by us as such. So it's run by a board, I'm on that board, and it's chaired by a traditional owner. And Shannon does a great job, and so does Conrad, to look after that. The Bowen family have lived on that property and shared that property over time. We've used it as a teaching centre for the kids that have come from the schools around Toowoomba. Until COVID times, the year before, I think we had around 5,400 kids visit that site in 1 year, which is astonishing. So we try to maintain that with a very, very, very limited budget, and we would also like to sort of expand the nature of the landscape. There were other features as well, and keeping in mind this, knowing the black soils of Toowoomba, there still are other features. So in order to see these particular features, they rested slightly on the top of the soil, but you only need a wet season to let them sink because they're quite heavy. And as a result, they had to be touched by very large steel poles, very delicately, by a team led by Annie Ross from the University of Queensland in the past, in the 80s, to raise them to the top on the exact positions where they were. So they were surveyed and raised so that you can see them more easily in today's world.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I'll just remind the listeners that they're on Footy in our segment called Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to Uncle Wayne Fossey. Now, Wayne, can you please explain when someone is to be called uncle or auntie, and is that an appropriate thing for non-Indigenous people, or is it disrespectful not to do that?
Sure. Look, I think it's important to recognise people as uncle and auntie. You know, that's part of the process. It's like that term, Mr., Mrs. You know, it's one of those appropriate titles. What is important is that the community gives you that title. You don't grab it or take it or steal it from the process, which is part of the discussion sometimes. It's not based necessarily on age, but age is one of those sort of criteria. So the elder concept is based on a person who is the knowledge holder. So that person has been seen by members of community in which they live in order to be able to say, okay, this person can represent us, this person holds past knowledge, and it's basically what many people call the tribe scribe, the person often who's written it or recorded it or done something with it in some particular way, but also can explain it to government, also can explain it to somebody who comes outside, it may be a tourist or whatever. And I've had some very interesting discussions. If you're in Malaysia, for example, the term uncle and auntie is used very commonly for somebody who's old, but it doesn't have a relevance in terms of in-depth knowledge but it sort of does. It really is not quite as defined.
Now, you are an exceptional guest and you're a good storyteller. One of the great stories that you told me yesterday, and we went up to Stenner Street because I was completely surprised, but that is the highest point in Toowoomba. So what is the significance of Stenner Street to Aboriginal people?
I think it's very significant that what we do is have close our eyes and have a different think about what Toowoomba would look like in the past. So we commonly look to the west and we see the grass landscapes, which are important, and they were burnt landscapes. So today, for example, out at Gummingurri, we're doing a burn fire workshop for farmers and graziers. There's never a question, not just because Farm Fest is on, we've got to fight them away with sticks. Well, not fire sticks, but certainly it's important to realise that they're getting it. Many people understand it. It's important to realise that Stenner Street, being the highest point, it's actually higher than Lofty when you sort of look at it in a realistic topo point. So Stenner Street had water, Stenner Street had height, and it was able to be used as a campsite that was very, very reliable. So Carney Springs was on the other side, or the Springs, and those of you that have been to the Springs Garden Centre or the cafe will know that that spring leaks through summer and winter across that landscape, and it's exceptionally important to realise you need water. So on the other side of that high point, many people lived, and there's a photograph that we have from the late 1880s that shows the family, a large family group, a large family gathering. Go down the bottom as you're heading towards Gavin School, and you'll suddenly find that the campsite there was about 50 people. Now we have modified, and there's photos to show that in modern days. So families like the Stenners moved across this landscape and also down into Flagstone Creek. Rob, for example, recently relative of that, recently owned the barn down the bottom. 5 generations into this landscape, and came to me a number of years back, say 8 years ago, with objects which were tomahawks. He arrived with, and he's a big man, he arrived with very strong arms and many Anzac biscuit tins from the 1920s and 30s. And I thought he was actually showing me the power of a biscuit tin. But inside them were tomahawk heads collected by his I think it's his great-great-grandfather. So we're talking about then, can you age them and have a look, and where did some of these objects come from? And it's interesting that the majority were traded objects. So they came from, the rock itself comes from New South Wales, or the rock comes from North Queensland. And it's very significant to realise they were collected by a relative who was farming in the valley of Flagstone.
Yeah. Tell me about Mount Lofty being a burial ground and why you've found more femurs femurs last longer than some other bones.
Yeah. Look, there's lots of stories around deaths and burials, but and what you'll find is that very often here, and it's a point which is not understood by many people, and I can show people one in our area. Trees, big boughs of trees, which are now quite high in the tree, became woven platforms. And those woven platforms, when people had died, had passed, were placed on those platforms and were dried. And often after a period of drying, they were taken and wrapped into a much smaller component, wrapped in stringy bark, or on the coast wrapped in paper bark, and sometimes here wrapped in paper bark as well. And they were carried to certain locations. So the caves at Redwood Park, above Redwood Park, along the ridges, at Kabbalah, those caves, the caves at Bingo Mountain, at Crow's Nest. We forget about all those locations. The significance, I think, of those burial sites is really amazing. So Mount Lofty was one of those, which in the stories that were around, including my grandfather's time, even talked about the past there. It's a place that we don't like to go. It's a place we don't want to go. It's a death zone.
Yes, that's right. Why do you find more femurs than other bones?
Yeah. So when they were constructing Mount Lofty for the high school, a number of bones were found, and they were femurs. The reason is the density of the bone itself, and it's one of those bones in our body. It's the biggest bone in your bodies, but it's basically one of those bones that stands the test of time. And so there's many stories. I've been as a 17-year-old, I was involved in the resuming of bodies on the largest burial site that we've yet found in Australia, which is on the Gold Coast, which is at Burleigh Heads, and people don't realise. So in the second swale dune behind the beach, a gentleman on the Gold Coast, Bruce Small, had been removing for many, many years the sand dunes with the bodies attached, placing the dirt within the giant cement mixers, mixing all the soil and bones together and selling it on the Gold Coast for compost. So the bones of Yugambeh people have been spread widely up on the Gold Coast across the canal estates, because Bruce was building his canal estates. And it wasn't until a human head appeared to be sold on the counter of a Gold Coast hotel that a local policeman sergeant of police happened to be sitting there, that all of a sudden we found out where all the rest of these locations were.
I can't imagine spiritually how disturbing that would be. I mean, for any culture, anyone, anywhere. Now, my time is scooting away on me as per usual. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, bit of left field. Wayne, Uncle Wayne, if you could do anything illegal without getting caught, what would you do?
Look, I think I'd really, really like to break into a major medical location and spread the hidden knowledge which is held by pharmaceutical companies around the world. Many of them have begged and stolen our products, and gum and jewellery reflects the nature of those products, medicinal things. The importance of gumby has just been discovered. So we've just successfully repulsed an American invasion to take over that particular product. And gumby, as many people would see it, it tastes revolting. I won't tell you what it tastes like, but it's a very definite description in our world. However, it's a great cancer agent, it's a great many agent, but there are many agents like that, and there are many parts of our research which are not shared because they become part of commercial interest, and it's the general public, us, really can't afford the nature of medical knowledge sometimes.
Oh, I love that answer. I've not ever had an answer like that before. It's just terrific. What about if you could, I might know the answer, no, I won't say that I might know the answer. If you could carry one type of food in your pocket, what would it be?
Yeah, look, I would carry bunya nuts.
I knew it was going to be bunya nuts.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tempting to say a Mars bar, but it really, no, the long-term survivability of somebody with a bunya nut, the incredible amount of carbohydrate, incredible amount of minerals, the opportunity to have a complex carbohydrate in your pocket that's there, that you can roast, that you can eat raw, that you can make into scones these days. You can do all sorts of things, and you make into ice cream. It's how good are we today? I've made a magnificent pesto in the past with prawns based on bunya nut.
Isn't that incredibly versatile? It's bunya nut. I did have one lady once who said she'd carry fruitcake, but I think bunya nut surpasses that as an answer. Wayne, do you think that your priorities have changed since when you were younger?
Look, I think definitely. I was always brought up as what I would call a person interested in the environment and a person who observes the real world, people as being part of that real world. So that has never changed within me. But I think as the older you get, there is an urgency to actually make sure that the things that I take for granted are not seen and heard by others. And so, for example, the power of the bunya story is an unbelievable story. I can't imagine for somebody walking for many months in a year on a 3-year cycle to go and have a feed at somebody's location. But it's far more than that. It's the cultural, social, emotional. It's a chance to sort out everything, and it's part of your wellness. And it's also a chance to get a wife or a husband. It's also all those magnificent things that happen. So I think over time I've learnt that probably sharing knowledge rather than sitting on knowledge, as we say, is more important.
So do you think that when you were younger you didn't share knowledge so much, or...? No,
look, I was probably in my family what I'd call the tribe scribe. So I shared a bedroom often with my grandfather during the winter time. He came to live with us for many months, and a man who was deaf and a man who'd had a fairly traumatic life as a young man. As a result of that, I wrote things down, and I've still got those written records, which are now all of a sudden they've become live records instead of scraps of paper in the bottom of a filing cabinet. So yeah, you come back and all of a sudden you have recollections of your grandfather, but you also have recollections. Wow, this actually is important.
And also I suppose it takes you back to your 13-year-old self, or however old
Exactly.
you were.
Yeah.
Okay, well I guess that sort of is a natural segue into my next question, which is what scares you most about your future?
Look, I think for most of us, and me included, health is a major thing. So, I have a number of major medical issues which I've tackled, and which includes, leukemia in my case, is prostate cancer, multiple surgeries, all sorts of things. And you need to make a decision sometimes. And I've been 9 weeks from terminal, so I really know what it's like to sit on the edge and watch. And I think those sort of decisions that many of us do, first of all, males need to talk about it and look at the issues. But you also need to sort of say to yourself, do I really want to be here or do I not? And I made a very definite decision that I wanted to be here. And, and a life on earth is a really a shared journey. And it's not just your journey, it's the shared journey by all those that you come into contact. So I think it is very important. The notion
of pointing the bone at yourself is an Aboriginal, and just quickly explain that.
I think there's an incredible power in our brain that we haven't tackled. So, what I was always told many years ago was we have two sources of energy. One is our brain. So when our brain dies, our body is not dead. What we do, and we all know this, we have another which sits above our gut. So our gut instinct, which is now, and in Chinese it's called qi, and it has a whole range of things across the world. It's a very significant thing. So you know that your brain doesn't tell you not to lift up that piece of tin because there could be something in it. Your experience sometimes doesn't even tell you that. But you get that feeling before you lift up that piece of tin on the ground that's been sitting there for 3 months. Maybe there's something under that.
There's a snake under there. But just in terms of pointing the bone...
Pointing the bone's one of those things where the power of the brain and the power of that. So there's this idea of the stomach being powerful, the stomach having its own energy and power like a brain, and the concept of the bone being withdrawn from the stomach of the Western people is there. So that and there are many stories about how it's done. So, is it the quick of hand? Is it the whatever? Is it a real bone? But we also know that if we believe something, and that's what I said about myself, if you believe that you want to be here, if you believe that you want to be well, if you believe that you want to have an influence on things, it's time to get out and do it.
Put it out to the universe. I love it. All right, now this is probably inappropriate. Your favourite royal. Now, I always tell people it doesn't have to be English. They don't have to be English. They don't even have to be living. Your favourite royal, Uncle Wayne?
Look, it's definitely not Prince Charles. But look, despite the colonial history of this country, nobody could really deny the power of the Queen in the current Jubilee year, and how somebody who has learnt what we've all learnt, how complex our families are, how complex our lives are when you're dealing with people and countries and individuals. So I'm talking about on country and looking at different clan groups and language groups. There wasn't an Aboriginal king or queen for a really good reason here. So we had a few people who united the tribes, like old Moppy here, but they didn't act as king or queen. Multuggerah didn't act as a king to this landscape. What you do have is the power of the monarchy. Now, I'm certainly a Republican, but the reality is you've got to admire somebody who has lived to that age, who has had that incredible influence. I'd really like to take her on country and sit her in the back of my car to be able to, see the other side of Toowoomba. But I think you can't deny the power of the individual.
Yeah, great. And I wish we had more time to talk about Multuggerah and Mirway, the tabletop, as people know it, but we're running out of time, unfortunately. Uncle Wayne, are you a dancing man? Is there a song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
That's a really good question, and look, I think all of those things reflect the nature of how we move and how our heart and our syncopated rhythm works. I'm not a great dancer, but I think it's very hard to sit back and not dance to the Macarena, which is really something that creates movement in everybody's body, regardless of what the culture is. And I've watched many times the students in my schools who are kids, various generations, get up to a Macarena where they won't get up to anything else. And I'm actually part of that group, yeah.
That's lovely. What about traditional dance? When you hear those drums or the didgeridoo?
Yeah, and I think the thing that's so often forgotten is the power of your heart. It's that beat of your heart, that syncopated rhythm that we have. The power exists within us, and for many, many reasons, culturally, spiritually, emotionally, and it's part of your own well-being, that you know that you need to move. So, those of you, and I play the guitar and various things, and, we were taught to play ukuleles and guitars and banjos and stuff as kids. So Dad used to make them, right? So it was, it wasn't a compulsory activity, but it's a great activity. So you learnt to tap your right foot. I'm right-handed. All of a sudden you learnt about beat and movement. And regardless, we're never brought up with didgeridoos, which is the current generation of our kids. But those sort of things, I think, really create within us what is our natural resonance that exists within us. And we realise the power of music and song and beat and dance as being one of those health elements. Zumba's not easy. So why would you do it if you didn't know it's going to make a change in your world?
Yeah. Well, it's releasing all those endorphins every time you're singing or you're dancing.
Yeah.
But for you, it's the Macarena.
Look, I think it is, yeah. Look, I really do.
The
yeah.
Macarena. We might have a little bit of the Macarena. Uncle Wayne, it's been such a joy talking to you today. I always say that I wish I had another hour, but I think I need another 4, 5, 6 hours to hear all the stories that you've got as the tribe scribe, and it's been a real honour to have you on Big Little Small Talk today.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.